Following Super Tuesday, it's looking ever more certain that the U.S. election in November will be a rematch, pitting incumbent President Joe Biden against his predecessor and rival, Donald Trump. Two elderly white men vying to lead the U.S. into the future, with very different visions for that future on issues from energy to immigration, from abortion to taxes, and on foreign policy. Many Americans are tired of acting as world policeman and paymaster, so the choice they make could transform America's role in the world. Today we're asking, Trump versus Biden, a race that poses worldwide risks? Hello and welcome to The Point. It is a pleasure to introduce our guests, starting with Ralph Freund. He is Vice President of Republicans Abroad, Germany. I'm also pleased to welcome Matthew Karnitschnig. He is Chief Europe Correspondent for Politico, based here in Berlin. And Janelle Dumalaon is with us. She's DW's Washington correspondent, and she joins us from the U.S. Capitol. Great to see you. And Janelle, I know you've been traveling around to a number of the states that did, in fact, vote in the primaries on Super Tuesday. What were your main takeaways from that experience?
Well, I suppose in a sentence, judging from what we've seen from the results as well, Donald Trump has a firm, solid grip on the Republican Party. And, from then on, we just have to hold on to our seats.
And are we sure that this will indeed be a rematch? There are a lot of complicated variables surrounding both candidates, aren't there?
Yes, there are. I mean, chief of them, I suppose it's less complicated for Joe Biden when we talk about sort of the process and the primary election process and how he is to be the candidate. He is the incumbent. But of course, there are complications surrounding his age. He might have, there's even talk perhaps of the possibility of replacing him during the convention. But this is seen as something that is quite unlikely indeed, and it would require a lot of Joe Biden's cooperation. He would have to step aside to do that. As for Donald Trump, Nikki Haley dropped out of the race. She was his only challenger. She did not manage to come close. Somehow there is a problem becoming the Republican nominee if no Republicans seem to seem to want to vote for you. Her hold seemed to be mostly on moderates and independents. So the only thing that may be challenging Donald Trump's candidacy, of course, at this point is the numerous legal trials he faces. He is facing 91 charges across 4 cases. But even the timelines of those are complicated. They could bleed into well after the election, and any conviction after the election might then render those legal cases moot.
Thank you. I want to come back to
very significant events. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to come back to the legal cases.
In November.
I want to come back to them in a moment, but let us first talk about some of the vulnerabilities that both of these candidates do have. Ralph, despite the resounding support of his base, Donald Trump seems to have some trouble winning educated suburban voters. Those are essentially many of the ones who, in fact, chose Nikki Haley. And she quite explicitly did not recommend to her voters to vote for Donald Trump. Will that wind up being a problem for him?
Absolutely. At least not at this point. She did not make any comments towards her voters to support now Donald Trump. And that could be also an asset for her in order for further developments, maybe to put that into the race, maybe to support Donald Trump if there's a give and take between the two of them. But up to now, she has not declared anything. But more important, Trump does not have the grip on the U.S. Republican Party. He has also the grip now on the delegates at the convention. But also remarkable is Trump is really facing his voters, a clean, sound group of people. He's not building bridges to anything in the middle or even more liberal. He's not building bridges like Nikki Haley would do. So he's only motivating his people. And if he's proven in 2016 that that could lead to the White House, but has also shown the midterms that could also fail. So there is a vulnerability at this point.
In a very narrowly divided electorate, Matthew, it's often said that it will be key to win those undecided voters. Interestingly enough, there are a number of undecided voters within the Democratic Party, within Joe Biden's base. If we look at the Super Tuesday results, there were some states where we saw as many as 20% of Democratic voters voting uncommitted to send a message to Joe Biden. Again, could that become a problem for him going forward? The Biden campaign seems to assume they're going to rally around him eventually.
It could, of course, become a problem, but I think it will depend on the next several months of the campaign. The campaign is only beginning just now. I think one factor that might not be getting enough attention here is the possibility that you could have up to 3 third-party candidates on the ballot in many states, including Robert Kennedy, the son of the former Attorney General of the United States, who was assassinated in 1968, who is a figure that many Democrats and Republicans find compelling. So this is the kind of thing where, you could have a candidate in key states drawing enough votes away from Biden that he might not win that state, or drawing votes away from Trump. We don't know which way that will fall, but we have seen that in the past. We saw it in 2000 with George W. Bush, who beat Al Gore because there was a third-party candidate then, Ralph Nader. And we saw it again in 2016 with Hillary Clinton because there was a Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, who was running again, and she got a few million votes back then, if I'm remembering correctly. So this is the kind of thing that could really be crucial in the end to the result.
Janelle, let me come back to those legal cases against Donald Trump. The first criminal case will begin on March 25th. This is a historical novelty. We have never seen a criminal case against a former U.S. president. As you said, the cases involve 91 criminal charges, some surrounding interference with the 2020 election. It seems that the Biden campaign believes that those cases will essentially crystallize some resistance to Donald Trump, even among wavering Republicans and certainly amongst undecided voters. Do you think that is true? How much do voters actually know about these cases?
I think that's a very good question. And I can tell you from following all these cases, what I can tell you is that they're very complicated. And it is hard to imagine any sort of median voter following the day-to-day on these cases with any sort of deep fascination. The polling is kind of mixed on this. On the one hand, you do have undecided and moderates saying that they would not find it good at all if a convicted criminal would become the president. On the other hand, you have the very committed Trump Republican voters who say that, in fact, it does not matter at all what he does, and they will support him anyway. They are ride or die for Donald Trump. I think what the Biden campaign has been trying to do is, while not weighing on these cases specifically because it would not be seen as appropriate for them to do so, I think what they're trying to do is kind of talk about these cases and what they mean in terms of voting for Donald Trump and why one should not do it. What they're trying to do is kind of attack it from a sideways way. So they talk about what Donald Trump means for the subversion of democracy, what his attitude towards institutions will mean for the nation. So they don't seem to want to, take on the cases directly and say this is the reason why you should not vote for Donald Trump, but they are sort of alluding to them in a more symbolic kind of way.
Thank you. Let's take a closer look at what this election could, in fact, mean for America's standing in the world. In 1630, on one of the first boats of English Puritans that set sail for Massachusetts, their leader gave a famous speech warning that the eyes of the world would be on America as it embarked upon a historic undertaking. And certainly that is true today. Both allies and rivals are closely following an election that could have a profound impact on America's role in the world.
With the Middle East conflict, U.S. President Biden has a strategic dilemma on his hands. He is clearly on Israel's side, but he has to increasingly address the Palestinians' position in order not to lose non-traditional voters. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is proclaiming that neither the war in Gaza nor the war in Ukraine would have started with him in office. Supporting Ukraine with all available means is crucial to President Biden in the fight against Russia. But Trump's Republican allies have been blocking these very aid measures for weeks. And it is the same with NATO. In contrast to Biden, Trump keeps questioning the NATO alliance and threatening not to protect the member states that do not spend enough on defense. American public opinion is skeptical of China. Both Democrats and Republicans are capitalizing on this by becoming confrontational with their Asian rivals. Biden or Trump? Who are friends and foes rooting for?
And let me pass that question right on to Matthew. In Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin, the latter claimed that he prefers Biden. Do you think he was just joshing?
Yeah, I think he was, to use sort of youth speak, trolling the United States with that. He has a very good relationship, as Donald Trump keeps reminding us, with Donald Trump. So I would see no reason why Putin would not want Trump to return to the White House.
And how about Xi Jinping? Who do you suppose he'd be rooting for here? If you really look at the concrete policies and positions of Trump and Biden, are they really all that far apart on China?
No, and I think that's a very important point because both parties in the United States are now extremely hawkish on China. Both see China as the main geopolitical rival for the United States for the coming generation, and they see this as an unavoidable confrontation, if you will, one that they hope will not result in armed conflict. I think for Xi Jinping, it might be the case that Joe Biden is a little bit more predictable. The problem, I think, for a lot of world leaders with Trump is that you just never know what he's going to do. He threatens to pull out of NATO. Does he really mean that, or does he just want to sell more weapons to the Europeans? I think Biden probably, what we've seen so far, is a little bit more predictable on that front.
Meanwhile, Ralph, many Republicans see in Donald Trump a strong man who can protect them in uncertain times. Yet he, as we heard in the report, he questions the U.S. commitment to NATO. Conservatives, like the former U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, says he means it. Does that really make America stronger?
Well, it makes it, first of all, less responsible, makes it to his voters maybe less cost-intensive. But I think it's a very, very dangerous game to violate international relations and also trust against domestic, battles in order to get into the White House. And I think this is very harsh. And if you look back in history, that most of the times did not convince the voters. I think if you are supportive to your allies, I think this will also have in the long run also you will receive support. And also, the U.S. has 1,000 bases throughout the world. He needs the logistics from the allies. He needs support from the allies. He cannot achieve this. The U.S. cannot achieve that all by themselves. I think it's also a give and take relationship. It's not that easy just to step out of NATO.
And yet, Ralph, there are plans that were put together by a think tank that is known to be advising Trump that refer to a dormant NATO, saying
sleeping NATO.
He wouldn't necessarily have to pull the U.S. out of the alliance. He could simply, for instance, recall the Supreme Allied Commander, who is always an American, or he could perhaps simply stop contributing money.
Yes, but we'll just have to see what's going to happen if he's in office. We just look back in history when he told the world that he will talk to Kim Jong-un, the rocket man in North Korea, and then what happened after all? North Korea shot more missiles into the ocean than ever before after the talks, so he failed there. I don't believe at this time of the day with what kind of arguments he would be able to achieve his goals without his allies.
Janelle, meanwhile, many of those uncommitted Democrats that we were talking about earlier are angry about Joe Biden's Middle Eastern policies, most particularly the fact that they say he doesn't push Israel hard enough to curb its offensive in Gaza. So far, the administration has trod a very careful path in the Middle East. Would you expect to see it more pressure on Israel in future?
Well, considering that there is a very real chance that his Israeli policy could impact his re-election chances, one could expect that they are looking at their vast array of options in terms of how to pressure Israel. I just wanted to note that I have been to Michigan, sort of the origin of this uncommitted movement. It is a state with a large Arab American, Muslim American population, and they feel very personally about this issue and how Israel has been treating Gaza, and in turn, the U.S.'s unwavering support for Israel. Now, of course, we're starting to see movement in the messaging already. Kamala Harris just the other day used the word ceasefire as far as I can remember. It's the first time she has done that. People are also waiting to see whether Joe Biden uses that word in the State of the Union address, which is going to be Thursday night. There's also a lot of talk around what exactly the U.S. can do, short of stopping weapons transfers to Israel and stopping aid. There is the sense that there are options in that box.
Which many of those Democrats do, in fact, advocate. But we could spend our entire show on that topic, so I will leave the Middle East there. But I would like to ask you, Matthew, about isolationism, because we're hearing a lot of talk about rising isolationism. And yet, when we look back, weariness with so-called endless wars has been with us for at least a decade or more. Is it really any different this time?
Well, I mean, it's worth remembering that it was Biden, actually, that pulled the U.S. out of Afghanistan, which Trump then criticized. So, these are sort of labels that people throw around, and it fits well with the America First agenda, I guess, in Trump's base. This is the kind of thing that they like to hear. But on the other hand, you hear him talking about Gaza, the need to finish the job in Gaza, this week. So I think for Trump, he can pretty much say whatever he wants on these international issues to his base, and they're going to lap it up. It doesn't really matter. I mean, he doesn't have the challenges that Biden has with Israel and Gaza, for example. Trump is all in pro-Israel, and whatever happens to everybody else doesn't really concern him. So that's a real advantage, I think, for him as we enter the final phases of this campaign, or the next, 7 months or so.
Then let's switch and talk about domestic policy, because, in fact, many people say it is ultimately domestic policy that is determinative of U.S. elections. Let's take a closer look at what the concerns are that are uppermost in the minds of American voters.
The economy is the most important issue for U.S. voters. In fact, the U.S. is in better economic shape now than it has been in a long time. Unemployment is low, inflation is falling, and the U.S. has the highest growth rates of any G7 country. But many Americans are not benefiting from this upswing, nor from rising stock markets. Another top issue is migration. Hundreds of thousands of people cross America's southern border illegally every month, more than ever before. Many Americans find this frightening. Biden is pushing for bipartisan border security.
So instead of playing politics with the issue, why don't we just get together and get it done?
But Trump wants to seal the borders and is stoking fears.
We got 15, 16 million people came in, and they came in from prisons and jails. They came in from mental institutions and insane asylums. They're terrorists, they're drug dealers.
The issue of abortion. Ever since the Supreme Court overturned the right to abortion in 2022, there have been different laws in each state. Biden is committed to legal access. Trump is strictly against it. President Biden has made climate policy a central issue of his term in office. The Republicans, on the other hand, rely on cheap fossil energy and want to reverse Biden's climate protection measures. Biden or Trump? Which America will win?
I'll pass that question straight over to Ralph, combined with a reference to one remark by Trump that's gotten a lot of attention, namely his pledge to be a dictator for the day and to use that day, among other things, to close the border to Mexico. That pledge, even the reference to dictatorship, doesn't seem to bother Republican voters, should it?
Well, it should bother. I mean, one of the key assets of democracy is trust in the legal system. And if you cut that out, if you damage that, I think there's also damage to democracy. I believe you shouldn't do that. Well, Trump's, agenda is clear if it comes to the economy. He describes the U.S. economy as a third world economy, is going down, is dying, but he delivers the solution himself. So first of all, that's the patient, and the patient is suffering, the U.S. economy. But I'm the doctor. I can help you out. And that's his simple message in order to point out his leadership.
Janelle, when you talk to voters, what are you hearing about what issues are absolutely top of mind for them?
Well, you mentioned them yourself, immigration and the economy. The economy is proving a particularly sticky one because obviously the Biden campaign had been hoping to really make its mark on voters with Bidenomics. Broadly his handling of the economy. It is doing better, but voters really aren't feeling it. Everywhere I go, people seem inclined to blame Biden for prices that have remained high and haven't gone back down since the pandemic. Now, obviously, they're not going to come back down. This is the new normal. And I think there is this hope that the closer it gets to the election, the more people would have gotten used to the new normal of these prices, and the more they will start to feel the benefits of all the investments that the Biden administration has made into the country. This is something that he really wants to highlight, but so far has not yet been reaching voters, so to say.
Matthew, in fact, a historically high number of American citizens say that America is on the wrong track. Is that really driven by economics or something else?
I think it's driven by the political environment, by the polarization, by everything that we've seen since 2016. There's no doubt, because if you look at on paper, the data speak for themselves. The economy is doing pretty well. Unemployment is the lowest that it's been over such an extended period since the 1960s. And, there is some hope in the Democratic camp that these factors will start to filter down and people will start feeling it more. But you can see the importance of perception here on all of these issues. And because of the bifurcated media environment in the United States now, where many people are just getting their information from a partisan source, be it on the left or the right, they don't receive other arguments that counter the narrative of one party or the other. And I think that is reflected in these, in these surveys about the economy, certainly.
If I come back to our title, we ask whether this is a race that poses worldwide risks. By stoking polarization, and both candidates are doing that, aren't they, in a way, playing with fire?
Well, I think we're seeing that all over the world, to be honest. This isn't just an American phenomenon. Certainly they're playing with fire, but once you go down this road, and we started down this road a long time ago in the United States, it's hard to turn around, and this is where we are. Some people think that this election will ultimately be about democracy. Other people say, oh, that's ridiculous. Trump is a Democrat. The dictator comment was just a joke. You can't take him so seriously. And this is unfortunately the dynamic that we have now in our political debate.
Let me ask you to talk just very quickly, if you would, Ralph, about the same point. In fact, Biden is saying Trump is ready to sacrifice democracy to put himself in power. Donald Trump is warning that the country is dying, that it's becoming a third world country. How worried are you that by playing the fear card, both of them are undermining the trust that is essential to democracy?
Well, it's definitely a damage to democracy, and I believe it's getting worse. Like sooner, even after the nomination of the candidates in the summer, I believe afterwards we'll see a real fist fight, and I think this will create a lot of damage to democracy. And again, what's the political message? Trump is just motivating his voters. He has a sharp group of voters, and they support him heavily. But compared to Biden has a broader range, but he's not as supportive to his voters. So we'll see who's going to win the battle.
Janelle, one sentence. A race with worldwide risks, yes or no?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you very much to all three of you for being with us, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk more about the election in future. Thanks to our viewers. Take a look at our website. Tell us what you think.